Hi, I'm Nicole Solis from GigaOM, and I'm here talking with Barbara Nelson, the CTO of iPass, and Carolyn Axtell from the University of Sheffield's Institute of Work Psychology. And we're talking about a recent iPass survey that came out. And you found, Barbara, in your report, you found some interesting data about the use of social media on the job. Could you talk about that?
Sure. So when we survey our mobile workers, we're trying to get a sense from them of kind of a day in the life. What's their life like? And so one of the questions which always comes up is, well, are they spending their whole day on Facebook? And while we found that they absolutely do rely on social media sites like Facebook, they don't actually use them too much. And it's a reasonably small amount of time, like I think on average 23 minutes. So it's the equivalent of the virtual water cooler, but it's not like they're spending hours of the work time sitting on these social media sites. Relatively small amount of time.
And what role, Carolyn, in your interpretation of the results, you found that there's actually a lot of value to this beyond just sort of the break aspect?
Yeah, well, I think, from the research that's broader, I think what we tend to find is that we really do need to maintain connection. And people who are mobile or working virtually, they need that social and emotional support, because particularly if they're spending a lot of time on their own, they need to have that connection back with the office, with colleagues, and etc. So I think Facebook is certainly one of the ways that they can do that, also through phone calls and other richer experiences. If you can do some face-to-face as well, then that's always beneficial, because that's the richest type of experience that you can have. But I think in general what we find is that if you use a multiple range of media, so not just one thing, not just spending time on Facebook, for instance, but also managers can use phone calls to catch up with people, or colleagues can use phone calls to catch up with people, and spend a bit of that time doing some social catch-up, not just task-related. And I think that can be very helpful in terms of helping people to socialise and also to keep in touch, maintain work relationships. So I think it does serve quite an important purpose.
Now, a lot of work communication these days is done by text, by email. IM, conversations on collaboration tools. What benefit do you think actually kind of getting on the phone or getting in like a video conference or call, what benefit does that add?
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the difficulties, I think, of keeping your relationship completely text-based is that we miss out on a lot of social cues. So, seeing the whites of the eyes, as it were, and also, just seeing, does that person understand me? You get kind of a confused look on the face, for instance, if someone doesn't understand. And I think you miss out on a lot of those cues when it's just purely text-based. So I think it just helps to maintain a shared understanding. If you have something a little richer, it doesn't have to be all the time. I think using all these media are beneficial, but sometimes, and particularly if it's a situation where there might be a risk of having some misunderstandings, or if it's at the very start of a collaboration, for instance, it's very useful to have a phone call or a face-to-face if you can.
Well, I think it's hugely important, particularly in a global workforce where the social cues are not the same. And so if you're relying purely on the written, the text and the email, you don't pick it up. So we have a global development center, and so you really do need to be able to see each other and connect with each other, to say, the puzzled look of somebody going, I'm not going to admit that I really didn't understand what she asked me to do. And it's really getting to know the person. They're not just a name. So I think in remote workers, if anything, they have to try even harder to really establish that their personality in the organization, that they're not simply a producer of results. So I think the evolution that we've seen in terms of the video technology has really helped. Even Skype video, that type of thing, very much informal video. So it isn't that you have to go into the book the conference room that has the video machine in it, that you now can just do it from home. You can be as much a participant in the whole experience without physically being in the office. And I think the evolution of those tools is really helping to make the remote worker really feel like they are as much a part of the, as the campus as the on-campus worker.
Yeah. I think one thing that the research has shown us is that when you're working virtually, these aspects have to be more purposeful and a bit more explicit, don't they? You have to actually make time to develop that relationship, in a sense, because it may not happen naturally, whereas when you're in an office with everybody else, it happens in the corridor, doesn't it, and by the actual water cooler. So you have to make more of an effort to go to the virtual water cooler or whatever, other technology you're deciding to use, and make more of an effort to develop those relationships and do that social side of things as well as the task side of things. So.
But once you do make that effort, the results are, pay off.
Yeah.
So having made that effort to have that level of relationship, it then makes it much easier to manage someone like that. You can tell based on the tone of their email, something's up. Maybe I should just give this person a call. Whereas if your only means of communication is the results of their work, you'll never get that sense. You'll never get the sense that something's up here that needs a more kind of personal communication. And also, as you say, at the start of a project, if you haven't made the effort to build that relationship, then it's phony. If halfway through you're suddenly going, I feel like having a phone call with you, and it's like, I must be in trouble, never warranted a phone call up to now. So you have to keep it alive the whole time. You have to view all your employees as people with whom you want to have a relationship, and they should have a relationship with each other. And to do that, it takes face-to-face. It takes being willing to fly people around the world some of the time. It takes being willing to adapt to whatever is the way they are doing their work. But the net result is a far more vibrant community.
Yeah, you can develop a relationship via text means, but it usually takes an awful lot longer. Yeah, absolutely. But some of the things that people put in place are things like having more explicit rules available, for instance. So, things like making sure there are deadlines and sticking to them, so that you all have shared expectations. You may have particular protocols about how quickly you think you should all reply to emails, for instance. So things like that can help as well if you're doing things remotely. So, yeah.
But I think a lot of it is being sensitive to those kinds of things and not assuming, particularly in a global company, not assuming everyone's online all the time, and recognizing the need for people to be switched off. And also some of that does also teach a level of self-sufficiency. So, because it can go both ways. If you've a culture of everyone's connected all the time, then people will be like, if I get stuck, I just ask. Like, well, no, maybe you need to do a little bit of work yourself to unstick yourself. So I think that is a really important aspect of it all.
Okay, so one thing that we talked about was that, Barbara, your team has, your company is based in the U.S. and has a development team in India, and so you're working with different time zones. So how has that affected the communication that you have with your team?
Yeah, it certainly has added a level of challenge because on every phone call, somebody's tired. So we have a 12-and-a-half-hour time difference between our two development centers. And so you need to be sensitive to the fact that you're imposing on somebody's home life. And while we might say, everybody's connected all the time, that's very different than saying, I need you to be on a conference call from 10 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night. And so relying on that alone, it's going to really challenge the relationship. So we do a mix of things. So some of it is travel. Some of it is you bring people from one geography to the other. You try not to take it for granted. You're very conscious of the fact that this is somebody's personal life that you're imposing on. So we try and establish kind of protocols around how many nights of the week we would ever do it and kind of use both directions. So sometimes it's the Bangalore team that have to do it on their personal time. Sometimes it's the Redwood Shores team. So trying to be very sensitive to that. And some of it is kind of managing the employee themselves. They'll say, it's not a problem, it's okay, I don't mind, my kids have gone to bed. And it's like, well, you may not mind for a while, but there's a point at which you may start minding. And so we need to not have it be taken for granted and really make sure that we're using all the techniques that we can. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll kind of video record. So we might say, well, we'll have the meeting during normal business hours in one geography, but we'll tape it and we'll videotape it, and then it's available to people in the other geography. So I think the main thing is just kind of being sensitive to that and not assuming that everybody is equally willing to be online 24/7. At the same time, you need to be very efficient. So, if I receive an email at 10 o'clock at night and I answer it at 10 o'clock at night, now the team can
3 workshops about to begin.
now the team can move on during my sleeping hours. Whereas if I wait till the next day to reply to the email, they've had a whole day where they weren't able to make progress. So there's kind of a balance between, while maybe I would prefer not to be checking email last thing at night, I can move the ball forward last thing at night, and then I get the gains of a remote team being effective. Similarly, we've sales teams in Europe, so they have their whole day before the California team comes in. So it's really kind of balancing that, where, okay, maybe it was 10 minutes I didn't want to spend right before I went to bed, but if it moves the activities forward, it was worth that investment. Just don't make me do it every single night of the week.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, what Barbara is talking about here, it sounds like very good practice, certainly from the research point of view as well. So about using multiple media and not doing it every time. Yeah. So, and I think that sounds really good what you're doing there. Yeah.
And you talk in the report, I think, about kind of balancing, making sure that the focus isn't just on kind of moving the ball forward, but also like setting aside time for creating that social time. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so, because again, going back to the text-based media, we don't do that very well in text generally. In an email we might say, oh, hope you're well, and that's about it, in terms of the social side of things. Whereas in a phone call, you're more likely to ask people how they are, how are the kids, and perhaps, go into a bit more detail. And all that helps to establish those relationships. So I'm sure that's what you found, Barbara, isn't it, in terms of your experience?
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.